Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. Again, I can never start an episode without thanking all of you for tuning in and for being supporters of the podcast. So, again, thank you for coming on and listening to another amazing story. So, today on the podcast, we have Shad Frazier, the VP of Operations at Endeavour Energy Resources out in the Permian. He is a Prohuman energy developer, which we will get into later in the episode while he explains what that means. He's also very active on LinkedIn and likes to give back to the oil and gas industry. He's had over 25 years of experience in this industry. So we're really excited to get to know his story. And yeah, let's get right into it. So Chad, thank you so much for coming on today.
Great to be here and great to hear your stories as well as what you're asking me today. It's been fun listening to your podcast and getting to know some of the stories of the people you've interviewed already.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And thank you again for accepting to come on today. So when we first talked with you, you talked a lot about growing up and how your parents were very hard workers. And we thought it was really inspiring how you even mentioned that your mom was never supposed to go to college and she actually ended up going to A&M. And we got a lot of Aggies who listen, so I'm sure they'll love that. And your father came from a family of 10. So you have a really big family. And on top of that, nobody was an engineer. So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and how your high school life and your college life, made you become one of the first engineers in your family?
Sure. Coming from Greeley, Colorado, which at the time was really not a energy hub. It was a space that was mostly an agricultural hub with a lot of farms, a lot of cattle, a lot of pigs, things like that. And my dad was in the agricultural sciences. It was more of a, I really love science and I really love being able to understand how things work. As I grew up, one of the favorite memories of me and a bunch of my friends was watching Top Gun, and all of a sudden, it's not just watching these planes fly, it's trying to understand what makes them fly. How does that work? And, what could I do inside of that space? So it led me to an idea of, hey, I either want to fly these things or I want to build these things. And that led me into, working on what was going to be the next steps. Where was I going to go? And I ended up graduating high school and ended up taking on an appointment to the Air Force Academy and really thought, this was going to be something I'm going to do. I'm going to be able to figure out how to fly planes or build planes. And after a short stint there, realized, man, this really wasn't what I need to do. I need to go someplace else. Left the Air Force Academy and realized that engineering isn't just one thing. It's not just flying planes, it's doing lots of things. And that led me to Texas Tech.
So you graduated in December of 96 with the lowest graduation rate for petroleum engineers in the whole US. First of all, what made you go into petroleum engineering?
Yeah, so that was a funny story. So as I left the Air Force Academy and I went to Texas Tech, I went there really, I was a walk-on to play football at Texas Tech University. And, the first day I show up for practice, I show up and I'm walking into the offensive line locker room and, I was just coming out of basic. So I left high school in graduation, weighed 260 pounds, 6'3", thought, hey, decent sized. I walked into that training room that first day after 8 weeks of basic at 200 pounds. And, so body was totally not in the right shape. The coach looked at me and said, are you in the right locker room, son? You look like you need to be in the, tight ends or down with the linebackers. I was like, no, sir, I'm a center. This is where I need to be. He said, okay. And then the coaches talked to me a little bit more and they're like, well, all the scholarships are gone. So you're walking on, whatever we can do, let's see what we can do. And I said, well, I'm trying to be an engineer. Yeah, we got some connections. One of the coaches said, let me go over there and call. And sure enough, the bad times in the oil patch had led to a lot of scholarships being unaccepted inside of the petroleum department. And the petroleum department said, hey, if you come over here, you may have to take 1 or 2 courses, but it's your first year of engineering. No one takes really any engineering courses your first year. Mm-hmm. Take it and let's see. So I went over there actually in the middle of a 2-a-day practice. So I'm right out of my pads and nothing but a set of shorts and a cutoff shirt, walk over and interview with this gentleman from Amoco who is probably in his 70s. And he kind of gives me the whole spiel about what petroleum engineering is. And I say, sir, I'm here to play football, want to be an engineer, love to have a chance to see what this is all about. And he said, all right, I'll take care of your academics. So tuition's paid for, have fun. And next thing you know, I'm a petroleum engineer and never look back.
So I was a college athlete as well, and it was very difficult for me to juggle both 2-a-days, long practices, study halls, everything along with my degree. And I wasn't an engineer. I did marketing. So engineering, I know, was a whole nother level. And there was a lot of guys that found it very difficult to play both sides, like to be the good student and be the good athlete. How are you able to manage that?
I would say I didn't. So I started off my first year with a really good GPA. And then, when I went to interview, I brought out this really nice V chart. And it was one of those things, really high GPA to start. The more I played football, the more the GPA sank.
Yeah.
And about halfway through my 2.5 years into my college career, I had to sit down with my dad and Dad said, well, son, I really want you to play football. I said, Dad, if I keep doing this, I'm not going to be able to graduate. So, and it was not really good times for Texas Tech. We had the last season I played, we had 13 people graduate that season, or I should say not graduate, get kicked off the team because they had 0 GPAs. And so the study halls and things like that, it wasn't a focus of that team, and the players weren't focused on academics. I kind of had to go into the coach and say, you know what? I'm going to get paid to be an engineer, but I'm never going to get paid to play football. So if you want a tackling dummy, I can keep showing up, but I want to be an engineer. And so I'm going to have to turn the pads in. And, it hurt because, turning in those pads the last time football is one of those sports you never get to play again. You can go golf, you can play baseball, you can play basketball, but when you turn in pads that last time, it's done. It's never again. And I don't look back because it really changed the trajectory of my career. My GPA went soaring after that, ended up out on the president's list last semester, really turned it around. And really education is the most important thing because it's with you for life. I got more scars that are with me for life in football than I do, what the education.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a very difficult decision, but like you said, I think you have a lot of a bigger chance to make it out there being an engineer versus are you really going to make it to the NFL and make those millions of dollars? Like the probability is on, stick to the traditional path and just become an engineer. So what was your first job straight into the oil field?
Sure. So, like we talked about, when I graduated in 96, I had offers from 3 majors, 2 pretty large independents. It was a great time to come out. I likened it to being a blue chip, high school recruit coming out of high school and could go anywhere in the country to play football. And, everyone was asking for engineers. So I got to work for Anadarko. And back in 96, we used to laugh because the movie The Firm came out with Tom Cruise. And Tom Cruise had this opportunity. He could have gone work at any of the big law firms, any of the most prestigious law firms in the United States, and he goes to work for this little bitty law firm in South Carolina because they give out the company car, they give out the company house, they give all these perks. Anadarko gave you a company car your first day of work. They gave you a great salary, and they were a smaller, independent shop. And so went there, had a great experience with Anadarko, worked with them for 4.5 years as a production engineer, doing basic production engineering work and completion engineering work. And at that time, Anadarko was not really a Rockies company. Anadarko was primarily a mid-continent and South Texas type of company offshore, and got the opportunity to head up the Rockies division, which meant that I got to go play coal bed methane properties that were out in the middle of nowhere during the summer months. So I got to go where it was cool in the summer. And in the winter months, when everything got frozen over, I got to go and work the Bossier Shale that was basically just kicking off kind of in between Dallas and Houston, just 2 hours up the road. So we got to be a part of 2 great different type of projects. One, coal bed methane, which was really interesting with very different dynamics, things you don't ever learn about in school, and learning how that worked. And at the same time, in the winter months, getting to work on tight gas and things that were just total new technologies being applied and changing the revolution of tight gas from that point moving forward.
That is like the best of both worlds as far as like getting the seasons correct on your job moves there. What we talked about, what I thought was really interesting being in frac myself, is when you started your career, you were pumping just with slick water. And Anadarko was one of the first to start pumping 40/70 proppant. What was that learning curve like, and how did you adjust?
We joked about it internally because it wasn't really a learning curve as much as someone said, we got a bunch of this crap that's sitting in the backyard. Can you pump this for us? It's just sitting in these bags and no one wants it. And we said, well, okay, let's try it.
Let's try it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's try it and let's see what happens. And the next thing you know, those wells start looking a little bit better. And we're like, well, maybe we need to do a little bit more of this. And, it's a trial by error. And, one of the big things that happened is when you have a lot of rigs going and a lot of activity, it allows you to try a lot of different things and see improvement very quickly and turn the switch very quickly from what you used to know to what you know now, and really apply new technology and see the benefits of it very quickly.
Wow. And then obviously you were in the field and kind of office throughout all of this. So how did your family like work-life balance work? I know you had two kids, or, you had one and you were kind of away a lot for, your first child that was born. And then for your second, you decided to be home a little bit more often. How did life look back then?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that my wife kind of, she put up the big, ultimatum sign. At that time I was, when I was rotating through the Rockies, I was ended up working, leaving on Monday, going into the office at 6 a.m., working at 6 a.m. to about 7 p.m. in the evening on Monday night, catching the 8 o'clock flight out of Houston, flying to Salt Lake, get into Salt Lake about 11 o'clock to midnight, driving down to the field, which was 2 hours away. So I pull in about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, get up the next morning, and you're on that, 6 a.m. pump time. So we're up on location pumping. We pump Tuesday through Saturday. And as soon as we're done Saturday morning with the last pump job, I was driving back to Salt Lake, catching the flight home Sunday night, getting into the office, going to the office, taking all the files from the work we did that week, putting it all in, going home, turning over clothes to the wife, and repacking the bag, knowing that the next day I was going back out and had one day to work to get all the procedures written for the next week of work. And I was going around and doing that. And, the wife and I had a pretty good agreement for the first couple of years. But when she got pregnant with the second child with us, and we were both looking at each other, and she's like, there's some things I'm willing to do, but this is not one of them. We need to find some balance. And, I found an opportunity elsewhere. Anadarko was a great company. They were actually going through the Union Pacific Resources merger at that time. And I was kind of getting lost in the shuffle and thought, it's a good time to probably find a different opportunity. And I had an opportunity to go to a small company in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Samson Resources, which was really my first foray of going from being public to going to private and seeing what that looked like.
You shared something really touching with us, and you talked about how your son actually had a little bit of resentment when you moved to Midland, and I think he was like 15 years old at that time. How did you deal with that, and what advice would you give to other parents that are in the same situation, whereas their job, it makes them travel all the time and they missed out on a lot, or maybe they moved their family so much that their kids kind of feel like displaced? How did you, what advice would you give?
I think in all things, and I'm not going to say I succeeded in this, I probably struggled with this like most parents. And, when you're trying to reach out to that teenager who has basically grown up with a group of friends their whole entire life, and then all of a sudden you say, we're moving. And, my wife asked the kids, she actually went into them and said, okay, we have the opportunity. We can stay here and he can go down there, or we can move with him. And both kids and mom, everyone said, nope, we're going. If dad's going, we're going. So we all packed up and we went, and, he struggled, and it took him. And I told him, there's a lot of things in life that you have to figure out and you have to struggle through. But at the end of the day, those struggles will define you and where you are in the future. And by his senior year, he ended up being prom king of his class, which was a little bit different. It's not a social, there, it wasn't like, the prestige award. It was more of who was the kind of what they call the animal spirit of their class, who best defined who was the person that they all wanted to be. And he was one of them. And
that's awesome. That's really awesome.
Things kind of worked out. He knew everybody in his class and he made a lot of friends, but it was a very distinct change. So, like all things in our lives, even in the oil patch, even though we think everything's going smooth just around the corner, some things are going to change, and those struggles through those changes will define us for what's to come after. So it's about being willing to adapt.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, no, I think a lot of the guests that we've had on, they've had to move, because usually they say, if you want to have a successful career, you're going to have to take these opportunities and not say no to a move. And unfortunately, the partner and the kids are always the ones that are kind of being dragged around. And, we've had other guests share how difficult that could be. So yeah, that's a great tip. How about, can you tell us a little bit between the difference between Anadarko and then Samson, the smaller company that you went to work with, and kind of the differences between a major versus more of a private company?
I think one of the biggest differences was that when I was at Anadarko, when you were dealing with the executives, it was a very restricted layer of management that you worked your way through. When you presented things, you presented to one layer up, maybe two layers up, and there was two more layers above that you never saw. When I was presenting things at Samson, I was presenting things to the owner of the company. And so you go from decision makers being well out of your reach and you only seeing them once a year to actually doing in having interchanges with the owner of the company on a monthly to even sometimes weekly basis when you're dealing with things that affect the company. So, you start really seeing the impact inside of some of those private companies on your decisions and how you're helping frame the decisions and how decisions are made. A lot of times we did presentations to the leaders at Samson, and they didn't tell us the answer. They waited until we were gone, and then the answer came down to us. So it's never that easy. I want an answer right now. Let's go make a decision. Sometimes those decisions still have to be thought out and worked through afterwards. But I think the biggest difference was you see decisions made in the real time. And versus being at a public company, a lot of those decisions can take a lot longer to get figured out.
I never looked at it from that way, being at a smaller company. And you're right. Like when you give them the first presentation, it's not like the answer is going to be right there. They're going to have to go back, think about it, and then talk to you. Whereas when you work for a larger company, there's all those chains that it goes through. So you don't really see that whole process. You just see if it got worked out or not after maybe you pitched it to your boss. So yeah, no, that's very informative. One other thing that we really love about you and we have been following for a while is like you're very active on LinkedIn. I think I gave a shout out to one of your posts that I really connected with me, and I really love some of the stuff that you talk about. You post some really good content, but we don't see a lot of operators that kind of do that. We have been seeing a upbeat in service companies and people part of service companies talking on LinkedIn, but operators tend to be a little bit more quiet. How do you handle the online presence, especially since you're a vice president of Endeavour? And I'm sure a lot of people reach out to you once they see your posts. And I mean, maybe people try to sell you things. I know a lot of my friends that work for operators, they always feel like if they're really active, it's just like everybody's just trying to get their phone number or email or something. And then also, have you ever found it challenging just because of the position that you're in?
So when I looked at LinkedIn, I started about 3 years ago. Well, when I came to Endeavour, thinking about what was my future going to be and how to get my name out. Because when I came to Endeavour, I wasn't sure what the future was going to be. How long when I came over as a contract leader and worked from a contract job into a full-time position. So even then it was about, what does the future hold and do I need to have other options? So it was about trying to get a name and presence out. Even today though, when I look at LinkedIn, there's so many storylines that I wouldn't get that I wouldn't have without LinkedIn. Not all the service companies am I going to be able to help. And a lot of people are reaching out to me. I get probably 1 or 2 a day of a salesman trying to reach out, especially in outside sales that's cold calling in. I don't buy equipment. I don't put things into the field. I have staff that do that. But what I do have is the ability to look at, scan things for different companies. And then if it's something that piques my interest or I think could apply, I can forward that on to the people that do the work for me and let them reach out. But I really try to limit the amount of contact I have with vendors just because I'm not the one that has to work with them every day. I work with my staff every day. My vendors are the vendors that work for Endeavour work with the staff. They don't work with me. So I try to make sure that those connections are at the right place. When I was a field engineer, I had that direct connection and I worked with those vendors every day. But now as I've moved up in the ranks into an executive level, it's a different type of conversation that has to be had.
So something that was really interesting was on your LinkedIn. You said you consider yourself a pro-human energy developer, which I have no idea what that means. I was very interested. I was like, what does that mean? I've never heard that term before. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is? And obviously it must apply a lot to your life, or you must really believe in it to even have it as, part of your LinkedIn.
Sure. I think one of the main things when I put that on LinkedIn was trying to help people understand that just because I'm an oil and gas person doesn't mean I'm an evil person trying to ruin the world. What I'm actually trying to do is help people and help build up people around the world. One of the things that we forget about inside of the United States is the fact that there are 3 billion people in the world that don't have access to constant electricity. We take for granted that we can flip a light switch and have power, that we have AC and we have heat whenever we need it. There are people that are still having to go out and collect firewood, and then people having to collect clean water. And because of that, we lose about 1 billion people a year, or 1 billion people have no ability to actually use their mind because their whole life is built around collecting material. So if you think about putting all of those humans and all of their minds to work, how many more Einsteins could we have had? How many more truly Elon Musk could we have had in the world if they would have had access to energy, clean water, and the ability to study? And that's really what being pro-human energy developer is about, is how do we provide the capability for human beings to develop and make the world better?
No, I love that. And I mean, that's a big mission of our podcast as well, is to hopefully reach some of those people that don't understand all about oil and gas and how positive the energy industry is and what we have done just to help the whole world. And how, if, like you said, if other areas had the accessibility that we did, who knows what those people could do. Which I think really goes right into our next question, which is, when we talked last, you were saying that neither one of your kids actually want to work in the oil and gas industry, even though you've had a really good, successful career. And having a 20-something-year-old, I think you have a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old. What are some of the things that you hear from them about the oil and gas industry, and how do you think we can touch the younger generation into kind of changing their mindset and, want to still come and help? Because to make a change, we need the next generation to be supportive and to also, want to be a part of the movement.
And my kids have been around the oil space. They've lived in oil towns. They know what it's about. They know how it affects the world. And I think for them, it wasn't that they didn't want to be in the oil space. They just found that there were other things that they were more interested in. But I think for all of us, it's about what drives us. When we get to a point in our lives, we have to find what we want to do every day when we get up and we come to the office. We don't want to go to an office where we're punching a clock and just dreading every day about what we're going to do. We want to get up in the morning excited about what we're going to do and the impacts we can have. So when I talk to my kids, and even talking to the future generations, what I tell them is, how can we get excited about what we can do as an industry for the future? I recently gave one of the commencement addresses for the Texas Tech senior class last year. And what I talked to them about was, you're about to go into an industry that is, in December of last year, November, really was kind of a struggle. These are graduates that are all looking for jobs, and very few of them had jobs lined up at that point in time. And I said, you can't give up, because what you're going to do in your career is you're going to be able to create green barrels. You're going to be able to create a cleaner environment, a better environment for all those that come behind you. Because unlike our past generations, like when I came out, it isn't just about producing a barrel. Now it's about producing a barrel in the cleanest way possible. And we in the United States have the greatest ability to make energy in the cleanest possible fashion, so that the rest of the world can have energy to develop themselves and get to our level. I think at the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is get everybody up to the level that we're currently at. And how can we develop the world and make the world better? So our job as energy professionals is about developing the world into a better place. And how can we get young people to understand it's not about trying to destroy the world. What we're trying to do is make the rest of the world as good as we are.
Yeah, and graduating and coming into this industry, like you said, it's their opportunity to be part of the change and be part of, making the industry better, instead of standing on the other side and just looking down on the industry. Just be part of the change, right? That's what I usually tell all the younger people when they, challenge me on the, greener energy, or, quote unquote, look at us as being bad people, like you mentioned, because we work in oil and gas. So you did a really interesting LinkedIn post, and I'm just going to read the last part of it, and I want you to expand on it because it's actually really good and it got a lot of really good engagement. So you said, I'm not against trying to be greener and environmentally conscious, but when you put the numbers to what it requires to be green, how clean and cheap is your all renewable world? Can you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. What I was doing there is, a lot of times when we deal with the green energy movement, they're looking at a very short-sighted supply chain. They look at green energy as being, I want to turn on my light switch and know that it was funded by a solar cell or funded or developed through a wind turbine that provided that energy. But what they don't look at is, what did it take to create the solar cell? What did it take to create the turbine? And so what I did there is kind of draw back in, is when you look at what it takes to create a Tesla, and all the rock we have to move, all the minerals we have to develop, all the labor that has to be put to it. What I was kind of addressing there was that we ended up having to, for every Tesla car that you make, you end up having to use, I think at the end of the day, it's like for 1,000 Tesla cars, we have to move a Jerry Jones stadium in dirt.
Oh my gosh.
So, what I really want people to understand is that there are effects or cause and effect relationships in this. And supply chain isn't just the end result. It's the total materials that it takes to get to the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, the oil and gas space is still one of the most energy dense products there is. And by doing that, we're going to be able to make energy transportable, safer, and easier for people around the world to use. Now, there will be a point in time, more than likely in your careers, when we're going to have fusion energy. And we're going to have other types of energy that are going to make energy cheaper and easier than in the oil and gas space. But today, natural gas is going to be one of the largest energy providers across the globe to be able to heat and drive energy across people's homes. People have already seen the renewable markets not really working the way they thought it would. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing Europe having to use a lot more energy. California is saying, hey, we got to go build natural gas plants because our renewables aren't able to keep up with our energy demand. Everyone's starting to understand that it has to be in not all or one, it has to be a mix. Mm-hmm. And I think that as being Prohuman, we have to understand that it's about the mix. And we can be green, but we also have to be reliable. Mm-hmm. And providing reliable energy will make the difference for everyone to lift the whole world up.
Mm. I love that. And that was so informative just on the way that you described kind of what the other states are going through and how ultimately, yes, everything that we do, we have to have energy for, and it's not a one-all fixed solution. And just like oil and gas is just not the only solution. There is other alternatives, but it's just finding that healthy mix that, supports the energy consumption that we have today. So for our last question, you spoke a lot about leadership and what makes a good leader when we talked. Can you give our listeners advice on some of your top 3 attributes that you think leaders have and what people can look forward to or try themselves to look at doing to become that leader in their organization?
Sure. One of the best lines I ever learned or got from a leader in the past was that leaders are not ever picked out by themselves. Leaders are picked out by their peers. And when peers enjoy working with you and enjoy being around you and working alongside of you, those are the people that will put you up to be promoted. So as a leader or a person that wants to become a leader in the future, it's about building relationships and working one-on-one with other people, not trying to step over people to get to things. We talked a little bit about this. I was an offensive lineman in college and offensive lineman in high school. Offensive linemen don't look for press clippings. No one an offensive center never gets their name put in the paper. What we get put in the paper is when the quarterback scores and the wide receiver gets to throw his hands up. We score by the actions of others. So I really felt like as a leader, one of my jobs is not to be in the limelight, but to push others forward and allow others to be able to be seen for the work that they're doing. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those really tough things as a leader, is making sure that you're putting all the others up first and not taking the glory for yourself, because most people want to take glory, but glory is done by winning as a team and winning as an organization, not by winning by yourself. So humility, bringing others forward and putting them up first, and never let your team outwork you. A true leader should be someone who leads from the front and doesn't lead from the back with a whip. The leader should be the person that's in the front driving the force, and more importantly, being the person that is out there driving the vision of what it is you're trying to get towards. People strive as a group to find what the future may hold for them. A true leader is a visionary that allows them to see this is what the future can be. I think Elon Musk is one of those leaders that very few people truly understand, because his vision is what is driving Tesla and driving all the companies that he builds up, is putting out a vision that is greater than anyone can achieve or understand, and then saying we can get there, but we can only get there together. So let's all get together and figure out how to make that to happen.
That's amazing. Yeah, those are all amazing, tips. And you're right. Being a leader really is about letting your team shine and not you trying to be in front of everybody and get all the credit, which we see some, quote unquote, people who think are leaders do that. But it's usually, like you said, the ones who stay back and give credit and like push their own, team to rise and to be, like you said, be the hardest worker in the room and motivate your team to do better by looking at, how much you're doing for them. So So thank you
Yes.
so much for coming on. You've shared some great insights and just amazing, 25 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, especially with all the ups and downs.